Farming. A couple of those books are on display over there, and I've been involved in the local area in local food and farming for a number of years now, and trying to promote all of this. We welcome you to the Lee Library and Lee Agricultural Commission sponsored series called You Are What You Eat. Tonight is the first of 5 programs running through the month of May at the rate of 1 per month, and we're very pleased to be able to announce this as a series. As I mentioned, this is also being prepared for Lee Community Television and for DVD production for the entire series as a source of important both education and community building for the people of Lee and some of the surrounding towns, but particularly for the people of Lee. I'm honored to have been asked to come over the town line to help Lee achieve success in another of its fine agrarian endeavors. Our program series through the winter and spring is a story of both variety and diversity on one hand and continuity on the other. Speakers range across local farmers Joel Miller, Tina and Eric Sawtell, Melissa Hollister, Jeff and Liz Conrad, and Donna Lee Woods. But each month's program is also grounded in the continuity of UNH Nutritionist, Professor Joanne Curran-Celentano, who is with us this evening, of Chef Ted McCormack, who is here representing the culinary arts, with myself as sort of an umbrella person or an MC, which I'm very pleased to do. You've probably seen the program topics. You know that tonight's topic is roots, very appropriate for the beginning, for the start. That February's topic on February 25th is vegetables, fruits, honey, and edible flowers, with featuring Joel Miller, Tina Sawtell, and Melissa Hollister. And March 25th is local meat, chicken, and fish, featuring Eric Sawtell, Jeff and Liz Conrad, and Blaine Cox. And then April 22nd on dairy and eggs, featuring Donna Lee Woods and Joel Miller. And May 20th, the final program on grains and smart shopping, involving Dorn Cox. But each of the programs involves our essentially resident nutritionist and resident chef, as well as myself, hence the continuity in a very unusual organization, and we think a good organization, of a program for community building. So tonight is the beginning, and so we begin with the subject of roots. We know that roots are synonymous with beginnings, with origins, and our speaker this evening, Joel Miller of Lee's Wild Miller Farm, will instruct us on and share his own experience on root crops, how to grow and store them. Then Joanne and Ted will comment on their nutritional value, especially in the winter diet, and ways we can use them for cooking. Joel, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'm Joel Miller of Wild Miller Gardens. We grow a range of vegetables, including roots. I'll tell you about a few of the ones that we can grow here in Lee, in New Hampshire. Some you may recognize, some you may not. Different ways to store them, and the different needs of different roots and storage as well. I guess we could start with some of the crops that people might recognize would be, when thinking of root cellaring especially, would be your carrots, beets, potatoes, and onions, garlic. We grow a lot of those. We also grow some other things you might not recognize, like a gill feather turnip and a winter radish and rutabagas, I assume people would recognize. Each of them have their own unique needs in storage. I've got a couple books here that I can share at the end on, for good literature for reading up on that. But basically we have, if you're planting a root cellar, you want to account for mostly humidity is your biggest factor with your different types of vegetables. Some like it really humid, some like it pretty dry. Most of them like it pretty cold, although some of them like it a little warm. So you have some challenges with storing all of your harvest in one space, but we've got ways to work around that. So crops like carrots and turnips and rutabagas, they all like really high humidity, like a lot of moisture so they don't dehydrate, which is what'll make them go soft much quicker. You can do that in lots of ways. You can packing them in some sort of material is the best way we've found from what we've been reading. And you can pack them in sand, you can pack them in sawdust. And something I've tried this year, because we didn't have the quantities of either of those things, is we had a lot of straw. We packed all of our roots in straw this year and had good success with that, very good success. Again, the whole point just being keeping as much moisture on the vegetable as possible. So what we've done with that is we've got some bins in the cellar, and we will lay down a layer of straw, pack in a layer of vegetables, and then leave probably 4 to 6 inches around the edge, and then another layer of straw, and then another layer of roots, and on and up until the bin is full. And that as you pull back the straw, you pull out the roots. And I found some softening near the edges, so I think I'll do it a little differently next year. But that's kind of one of the neatest things about root cellaring, just like gardening, where every year you're going to learn something new, and something's not going to work, something will, and it'll keep you excited. It keeps me excited about trying new things. But for the most part, I was very happy with that. But then other things like potatoes, they don't require so much humidity. They're better in just colder temperatures, as close to 32 as possible. Our cellar is under our house, just an old stone cellar, and it stays pretty cool, though we do have a furnace in the cellar, and that's a consideration. So we do try to keep the potatoes as far from the furnace as possible, also in as dark of storage as possible. And that stands for most of your root crops. They like to be in the dark when they're stored. Some of them will want to be in the sun to be cured right after they're harvested. Some crops, not all of them though. For storage, we've got boards over all the windows in our cellars to keep the light out, keep it good and dark for them. Potatoes will tend to turn green, especially if they get too much light on them. And on to other crops like onions and garlic. These are some of our favorite crops. We grow a lot of garlic on our farm. But these both like much drier storage conditions and a bit warmer, between 40 and 50 probably, but not too warm. The moisture especially is what will hurt these. So we've found a good place for us to store excess or stuff is in sort of a semi-heated room. We have a semi-heated room in the barn that we store bulb garlic in. It stays between 40 and 50-ish in there, and we try to keep the light off it there too. But onions we just keep in the front entrance of the house. It's a small little room that doesn't get quite as heated as the rest of the house, and that speaks to another thing for a home that might not have a cellar, an actual cellar under the house like you think of as a traditional root cellar. There's lots of different ways to create this environment, to store different vegetables, and there might be any number of places in the house that might work. Like I say, the front entrance to our house is one we don't actually use too much, especially in the wintertime, and we're able to close it off and keep the heat out of it just enough, and it works great for us. A closet might work the same way. A closet you can close off and keep it a bit cooler. It's something you'd want to experiment with. Probably look for places in the house that might work like that, and put a thermometer in there for a couple weeks and feel it out, see what sort of temperatures you get, and even just sort of in an enclosed porch or something. And there's outside places under porches can get you up to hard frost time, at which point you'll have to move stuff in. But there's lots of ways you can get through the longer part of the fall. You don't need to have a built-in cellar to store roots. Is what I'm getting to. And I think there's a lot of ways you can make that work. And attics might be really good for some things. Again, some of the drier stuff would do good up there. Roots and winter squash too. Winter squash likes it dry as well. It's not actually a root, but it's a good one to store for the winter. And they like it a bit warmer, maybe between 50 and 60 or so. As I can think of, winter squash and onions and garlic, all of those like to be cured after harvested, and I think that's fairly important, especially with the onions and the garlic too. Meaning, after you pick them, you want to dry them down completely, or for the sake of squash, you want them to form their hard shell. And actually, with potatoes too, we let them cure before digging them a bit, make sure the plant tops die back, and give them a couple weeks of curing in the ground. It toughens up the skin. It'll make it hold up much better to the sort of the abuse you might put it through in harvest. Typically, any bruises or scars happening in harvest tend to be some of your biggest causes for spoilage in the winter. So we try to be very careful with harvest. But the potatoes, you have to cure them underground, because again, you don't want the sun on them. Once you turn them up and dig them, you want to harvest them right away. Onions can do fine curing in the sun. We cure our onions in the greenhouse. You want the necks to completely dry back and become very brittle. It sounds like paper once they're ready for storage. Any sooner and you'll get mold traveling down the stem down into the root, and it'll spoil, and the rotten onion's really stinky. And garlic as well. We do a lot of garlic braids, like you see over here, for marketing our garlic. But it's also a great way to store garlic, because you can hang it up and create plenty of airflow around it. But what we do is we hang these in the barn loose after harvest, so that they dry down completely. They don't have light on them there, but they've got airflow constantly. So if we were to braid them or bundle them as they are, before they are completely dry, you'd have a risk of mold in the stems. And they say winter squash likes to be, and pumpkins, whether you cure it in the sun for after picking, or whether you wait till the plants die back and you give it a couple weeks, but you want to be able to push your thumb and not see your thumbnail go into it, so it forms a tough skin. I think a lot of the success of keeping your veggies through the winter is how you plan for the harvest and how you handle them at harvest. And again, keeping an eye on them in the cellar. I think we try to do a real good job of that, but we're not always as good as we could be, and I think it's been fairly forgiving for us in most cases. I think I lost my train of thought. But one of the things that's important for success with that is planning your harvest. And we should say here that some of your best harvest crops should be planned for planting, so that you're harvesting them in the fall. You can plant storage crops in the spring and harvest them midsummer or whenever their harvest date might be. But your best storage options are the roots that you can dig just before the ground is going to freeze, so you can let them reach full maturity, though you don't want them to over mature. But you want full maturity, and by the time you get them in the cellar, you want it to be cool enough outside that the cellar is going to keep a consistently cool temperature. So in our case, in the case of onions, we typically harvesting in July, and you want to grow a good variety for storage. There's many different varieties, but typically your varieties with a thicker neck or the greener tops are not very good for storage. You have sweet onions that are like this. They're best eaten fresh. You'll want to look for storage varieties of vegetables that you grow for storage, which, like these onions here, the necks are fairly thin. They dry down very well and consistently, and they're meant for keeping over the winter. Other roots like carrots or turnips or radishes or rutabaga, stuff that doesn't take a full season to grow, you can do successions of. You can do early spring plantings for a summer harvest that you would want to eat fresh, and if you wanted to store, you'd want to plan a second or a third planting so that you're harvesting fully mature crops right at the end of the season. That can be important too, I think. This year I think I had a few things that matured a little early on me that I wasn't, like the winter radish front and center, which you may not be familiar with, but it's something we've tried for the first time this year. I planted it a little earlier than I should have, I think, and they over matured a little bit before I was able to get them in the cellar, though they are still keeping fairly well for us. So like I say, some things are pretty forgiving and you can work around, but finding a good book and a set of general guidelines to follow is, I think, a beneficial thing, just so you have an idea what crops require what, and the general idea of when you want to be planting and harvesting. And a lot of that too is just trial and error each year, and taking notes and learning from your mistakes and having fun with it. And I think that's probably, I'll answer a lot of questions afterwards, but I think that's...
Joel, can I just shoot one question your way? Can you tell us about the story of the gill feather? And let me preface that by saying that Dennis Harrington, the principal of Moharramet, says that the kids are wild about the gill feather.
Yes.
Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, the gill feather turnip is one that you might not recognize. It's not like any turnip you've ever had before. It's very sweet, and this is the normal size for it. It even gets much bigger, and even so, it's not getting tough. It stays very very mellow. They're really beautiful to eat fresh and raw, like apple slices I've got here. We'll pass them around afterwards, grated into salads or slaw. We use them a lot in soups and stews. They are an heirloom turnip that was originated in Vermont, and it's unique to the Northeast. And we've been enjoying growing them very much. We planted my crop July 15th this year, and we harvested in the end of October. And I've been packing them in straw all winter, and they've been storing extremely well for us. Also, you can leave them right in the ground, and that's another thing for some other roots. Certain roots, carrots, parsnips especially, the gill feather turnips do really well. You can leave them right in the ground to store them too. You can just mulch them over, and if you're hardy, you can go out and dig through the snow and dig them up in the winter. Though I never seem to want to do that. I bring them in, or you can let them sit all winter and harvest in the spring. And some crops like parsnips, they'll just be so much sweeter in the spring for the cold. So much better for it. Though you do have to contend with the mice that like to find the straw in the wintertime. But it is though it's a kind of fairly daunting looking, large, weird root vegetable, it's really good. And if you get not sure what to do with it, there's always, you can find things to do with it.
I think they've been serving them in little strips at Moharramet, so the kids never see what they look like in the wild. Yeah,
Chuck, I think, has been started supplying the school district with them this year, and that's been a big success, I think.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, thank you, Joel. We've been talking a lot about nutrition here, and we need, therefore, to hear from a nutritionist. So perhaps my colleague, Joanne Curran-Celentano, will weigh in on nutrition.
Great. Well, delighted to be here. And for those of you that have enjoyed these wonderful vegetables in front of us, you know that you don't really need an excuse to eat them because they're just so delicious. But they also pack a lot of the really valuable components that we're interested in. And we see that they range in colors from oranges. We don't have beets here, but reds and yellows. And those colors that the plant produces are actually things that are referred to as phytonutrients. They're not necessarily things that vitamins and minerals that are classical, but these are components that the plant develops for itself, but in fact provide really wonderful nutrients to all of us. So when you look at the color matters. Color provides, those pigments provide a lot of the nutrients that are important for our bodies. So when I look at these, I almost feel it doesn't justify to break them down into their individual components, but in fact, when you look at something like carrots, which we have here, which are orange, that orange color is actually a precursor to vitamin A, which of course you may know is important for vision. But the pigment before it becomes vitamin A is what is called a carotenoid. And those carotenoids are not only important in our vegetables that we see in these roots here, but they're also responsible for the beautiful colors we see in our leaves in the fall. So from a New England perspective, carotenoids are important for many reasons. But from a nutrition perspective, they're very helpful in terms of maintaining good health and immune function. Potatoes, which is it potato here?
Potatoes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it's estimated that we eat somewhere between 125 and 130 pounds of potatoes a year. And one of my students who was in my class many years ago told me that the one thing she remembers about my nutrition class is that potatoes have more potassium than bananas. And that was 25 years ago, so I guess that really made an impression. So I thought I should share that with you also. The other thing that we don't have here but are sweet potatoes, which have become a very popular item. And again, you have potatoes, the regular potatoes that are white, and white is actually a pigment, by the way. The lack of what we see as color doesn't mean that they don't have this rich benefit to them too, because the white actually is a pigment also, and that provides some of the more water-soluble components that are actually really important. Sweet potatoes, because of their orange color, are also very high in precursors to vitamin A, and they're also high in zinc. And if you think about these roots that are actually sitting in our soil, they're actually absorbing from that soil many of the important minerals that are in that soil, as long as your soil has minerals in it, which I'm assuming all of our farms are really rich soils. And this is one of the concerns we have with the more industrialized foods, is that when you get the local foods that are with the very rich soils, that they are actually absorbing into their skin as they're sitting in their roots. They're actually taking in all these important minerals. And then when they're sitting there in storage, interesting thing about roots is that they actually become more nutritious while they're in storage. That when they actually condense some of the nutrients in there, and even though we're controlling the moisture, as they lose a little bit of the moisture, the nutrients actually become more condensed. So they're really a wonderful way of really taking some of what happens from the sun and the soil and actually holding on to it so that we can eat it during these cold winter days when we're looking for something to be happy about other than the snow outside. Beets are another one. When you think about beets, we just made some beets today, and the color just goes everywhere. Well, that color is just, that beautiful color is also a phytonutrient that is actually very beneficial for us. It's also high in folate. And it adds also a lot of beautiful crunch and color to our foods. Color matters. Visually, it's important for making us really enjoy our foods. Garlic is an interesting one too. There's been lots of folklore about garlic and health. And I try to look at the latest information on whether garlic actually lowers cholesterol or has a role in cancer prevention. And there's lots of stories out there. I couldn't find the evidence that I would say for sure that garlic, you can eat it to prevent cancer or lower your cholesterol, but it's delicious. So let's not lose sight of the fact that there are other components in here too. Onions add taste and aroma to everything. Parsnips, I think Joel mentioned parsnips, and that those frosty temperatures actually turn the starches to sugar. So if you can actually leave them out there, which I'm saying to you, I certainly wouldn't do that, but I'll come to your farm and get them, that they'll actually be really, they'll be much sweeter because those starches are being converted. These vegetables also represent a really wonderfully healthful source of carbohydrates. And if you follow the literature or you follow the mainstream news on carbohydrates, it sort of goes, it's good, it's up and down and up and down. Nobody can argue about the carbohydrates in any of these root vegetables. These are a great source of energy for us, keeping us warm during the winter months. Rutabagas, which is here, right? And it's nice to see that they're really not just for Thanksgiving, and actually these are great at strong peppery flavor. But they also, the color of the rutabaga also is loaded with these pigments that actually add nutrition to our diet. Turnips are high in vitamin C, and again, these are things that actually can increase over time as they're stored. You put them in the straw; they're actually holding on to the nutrients, so that when you actually have a wonderful source of many of the different nutrients that we need, the minerals that we get from the soil. So it's a great symbiosis here. You take care of the plants, they take care of you, and the roots are certainly a great example of ones that'll do that. There's lots of different specific components to each one of these, and if anybody has any specific questions, but at least that's a quick overview that they're just so delicious that this is sort of the added benefit that they're also very healthful.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanne. So now we move into the preparation of all of this food, and we're very fortunate to have with us one of the great chefs of the seacoast, and I say that from my own experience of his work, Ted McCormack, Chef Ted McCormack, to talk a little bit about preparation of the root crops.
Great, thanks. I did bring a basket. They were a bit full here, but I do have some beets. Everything in that basket, aside from little horseradish root, is all local farms. And a quick word on Blue Moon, where I'm working now in Exeter, is focused on purchasing as much as possible, as the cliche goes, for our produce and meats and dairy. And so this was a great marriage when I found out about this program through Donna Lee, and I said, sure, this would be great. So what we have in front of us here, I have a few of them also in the basket, are our toys in the kitchen, so to speak, our laboratory. I really get a great, it's exciting to work with different vegetables from different farms, and there are different varieties. So when I hire a new cook, I often give them I purchase variety specific or size specific for specific use. So as Joel pointed out, the large gill feathers are great for, you can eat them raw. So it looks crazy, but just peel it and wash it, and you can. So also the larger turnips are great when we roast them, and we can get bigger pieces. The smaller turnips might be better appropriate for a salad where you want the hakurei or the white summer turnips, salad turnips they call them. And then there's also a scarlet turnip that we got from Stout Oak and also from Tuckaway, which is smaller than a golf ball, but red on the brilliant red on the outside and white on the inside. So again, color matters a tremendous amount. As you can see, obviously with the tremendous amount of cookbooks that are out there, this one I just got for Christmas. It's titled Roots, how appropriate. And it's really good. I have a good knowledge of what I'm working with, but it's always good to take a look, see what somebody else, oh yeah, right, yeah, that's right. I have had the opportunity to use overwintered parsnips, and they are superb. It blows you away. And that's our goal in the kitchen, is to provide the best possible food, and hopefully at a reasonable price to the customer. So another book that not just on roots, but Farmer John's cookbook, The Real Dirt on Vegetables. So I got this a few years back in the CSA that we belong to. Also asparagus to zucchini, and kind of encyclopedia-like books where you can look up turnips, have their quick storage suggestions and their quick cooking suggestions, and take it from there. So what I brought here, as I dance around my monologue, a little soup, and this one is on the menu today at lunch at Blue Moon, is a rutabaga puree. So we have done the turnip, we've done a mix of, we often do the carrot. But this one in particular is just rutabagas from Brookford Farm, which is now in Canterbury, New Hampshire, and it has vegetable stock and cream into it. So it is, in French we call it potage, and in American we say it's a cream of. It's the same. Cream of doesn't have to have a negative connotation. One of the cooks was trying to, doesn't sound terrible. No, it doesn't sound terrible at all. It's what it is. Call it what it is. And on my left here, or your right, is this is a potato pancake, or a galette in French. Is also half potato and half kohlrabi. And so you want it a little higher? Is that what you're trying to say? There you go. Yeah. Whoa, not too high. So I just made this for dinner for my wife and I just before I left. That's why I was a little late. My fault. So this is a very easy preparation. Peel, shred. Actually, I don't peel the potatoes, but the kohlrabi is necessary to peel. And that is actually better off with a knife than a peeler. Sometimes you have a peeler that goes deep, and that will be the one you use for that. Some peelers go very light. Use that for the carrots. And so again, like variety specific, utensil specific, recipe specific. So this was a couple tablespoons, 4 tablespoons of butter in a cast iron skillet, and it's about 12 ounces each kohlrabi and potato, shredded, mixed with salt and pepper, on top of the hot butter, and then let that cook on the stove for maybe 5 minutes, just until you start smelling the potato. Put a lid on it and then put it in the oven. It was 400 for about 20 minutes. And then you invert the cake onto the plate using your Jedi magic. It comes out like that. If it doesn't, it's okay. You just squish it together and you're going to cut it anyways to put it on a plate.
Nobody ever see.
Yeah. So very versatile. All of these vegetables, very versatile. You shouldn't only think like Thanksgiving. We have I'm not sure if this is also spicy, this radish spicy?
Not as spicy as
Not
the
as,
radish.
there's the German Munich radish, which is kind of like horseradish. So we can have a spicy horseradish dip. That's not really, it's from radish. That's the same mustard family. Having all of these at our disposal allows us to have fun in the kitchen and give something unique and different on the plate, and everything slightly different. Another favorite of mine was the beet tarte tatin. A tarte tatin is an apple dessert. It's a French apple dessert with baked puff pastry and butter. You're going to see that common theme. Butter, I mean. So you cook the beets in butter and put puff pastry on the top, and then invert it as well like that. And so it's a play on the French dessert, but served as a savory appetizer. And I've done that at the restaurant a few times, and we've done that at some CSA cooking classes that I used to do with Willow Pond Farm in Brentwood. So onions, we buy a 50-pound bag of onions 3 times a week from Brookford Farm. We're very, very lucky that over the past few years, the local farms have been able to grow to support restaurant purchasing, because we also buy carrots from Brookford, similar size. And I just asked him what variety. He said they're S-T-O-H. Does this mean? It's a German word. No, that's okay. A variety specific, again, I go back to, we buy the small Châtenay carrots, which are about that length, but not as thick, and they look beautiful on the plate. So you don't have to peel them. They're very tender. They don't take as long of a maturity, and don't know if they store all that well. Some varieties do and some varieties don't. So in the summer, I really bounce around, sorry about this, but in the summer we have the torpedo red onions, which are awesome you put that grilled on a salad. And then in the winter we get the storage onions. So we also grow some stuff at home in a couple garden boxes. So I've looked up, researched a lot of different names of the varieties in the past, and one of my favorite onions is the Cipollini onion. And so recently I bought 5 pounds of red Cipollinis, which I have never seen before, from an organic farm in Maine. And the Cipollini onion is a garnish on a steak that we have on the menu. So I take something unique that Chuck brings to me, or one of the other farms brings us. You got to try this. It's great for, whatever. And then we find a highlight for it on the menu, and we give it, we give it some notation. This is from Tuckaway Farm or Stout Oak Farm, and it's maybe it has a variety name on it, maybe it doesn't. In the case of the Gilfuther, it does, or we simply say heirloom variety. Where else did I want to go? I could chat for a while, but I think we'll
Can I just make a comment on something you
Sure.
said here too? First of all, the pancake here reminds me of the wonders of being able to do pantry cooking, where you actually, it's a cold night like tonight, and you don't want to go out, you don't want to go to the market, but you always have the ingredients that you need, and you can make such wonderful, quick dinners from the things that you have in storage, which is great. We talked a little bit about peeling, and I get that question a lot, should I or shouldn't I peel? Well, when you are using locally grown food, you want to wash, but you really want to hold on to as much as you can of those minerals, so the skins are really a good thing to do. If you're getting your potatoes from a place where you don't know that whether they're using pesticides or herbicides, then you would want to not eat the skins. But certainly these vegetables, you want to eat as much of them as you possibly can, and the ones that are touching the earth, get off the dirt perhaps, but eat them as you can. And in defense of garlic, one other thing I wanted to say is that garlic is just so wonderful. It makes everything else taste so good, so that even if it doesn't cure cancer, it actually helps you eat all those other wonderful things because they taste so wonderful. Okay, I'll stop there. Lots of other things to say.
Right.
Well, I'm sure there are folks in the audience who are anxious to bring in their own comments and ask questions and so forth. I would just reflect on the fact that there's one category of person not up here on this panel, and that would be a builder, a carpenter, a designer who does root cellars. And I'd suggest that there might be a new business opportunity in producing, manufacturing root cellars, helping residents, homeowners to have root cellars and so forth. We know this is true with chicken coops. There's an emerging business in the manufacture of chicken coops around various parts of the United States now. And why not root cellars on site? Okay, let's open it up and throw some questions or make some comments at our panel. It's all yours.
I understand about temperature storing onions, but how do you store them in your cave?
Say the first part of that again.
How do
Onions.
you store onions?
How do you store onions? Well, again, you want to start with a variety that's meant for storage, and curing them is the most important thing, I think, beforehand. Is making sure they've dried down completely after harvest. Like I say, we cure ours in the greenhouse. You pull them from the ground, you put them in the greenhouse with the tops on, and let them dry down entirely. If you cut the tops too soon, the moisture in the stalk tends to go down into the root and start to deteriorate it. But let it dry completely, and then we just take and pull the top off, and that's what's left there. Now they like a bit warmer than some of your vegetables. I think between like 40 and 50 is a happy place for onions, and they want to be very dry. So that's a great one for a cool closet or a front entry to the house, maybe a closed-in porch, or just a cool part of the kitchen. With any vegetable that you're storing like that, you don't want to pile them too high for the sake of damaging them, but yeah, you can store them in bins and fill the bin up. Just be aware of how much weight is on the bottom ones. And you can see, yeah, I guess something I should point out is that in the summer you're harvesting all fresh vegetables, and you might think of them, I guess you hear the term living foods, and I wanted to point out that even root vegetables are alive and want to grow, and that's one that maybe got a little too warm or something, and yeah, they're alive in there.
Would you eat the green top on that?
You could, yeah, you could chop that up and eat that.
Yes.
Would you be willing to comment, Joanne and the chef, on the difference between yams and sweet potatoes and the nutritional value and also taste? Is there a difference?
Technically, there's a difference.
Yeah, I don't think we get, which is the one that we get here? We don't get both of them in this environment.
They're both tough.
Yeah, yeah.
This is what we get more often.
I think they're all yams, or are they all sweet potatoes? They're all sweet potatoes?
In the grocery store, it says canned yams, look at the ingredients, it says sweet potatoes.
Yeah, yeah.
They want, it's a marketing thing and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we only get one of them.
I think the yam is I think a larger, rounder tuber, and the sweet potato is more cylindrical.
We don't get the yams here, is it?
You can get. It doesn't grow in our climate. It's not native.
Right.
It's not native. It's not native to our climate. One is from South America and one is from Africa, and so we have them in this country, but primarily we have sweet potatoes.
Professor Becky Seidman from UNH is doing a good deal of work at UNH on sweet potatoes and producing them at the Woodman Farm.
Comment on the nutritional values that you get from various preparations. For instance, we understand usually that if you boil something, you're going to lose a lot of nutritional value. So I'm assuming that's baking and roasting. What about sauteing? Does the high heat take away nutritional value?
That's an interesting question. It really depends on the nutrient you're talking about. For many of the nutrients that I was talking about here, cooking actually increases the what we refer to as bioavailability. That means your ability to absorb those nutrients. If you're talking about something like vitamin C, which is a water-soluble vitamin that is quite easy to lose in water cooking, then you would actually lose some vitamin C. Some, not all of it, but some of it. But for the most part, for vegetables, because it breaks down some of the matrix, the structure, it actually makes the nutrients more available to actually heat them. When you are roasting, you're getting some changes in the flavor is changing as a result of some of the chemistry that's going on in those vegetables. And but as far as nutritional value, it changes to some degree, but it's not significant changes. Yeah. Okay.
Doesn't make any difference as long as you use lots of butter.
Well, actually, that's a good point, because in some of these, some of the components that we're talking about here that are what we refer to as fat soluble, the butter actually helps with the absorption of them. So any butter, oil, any of the fats will actually help with the absorption. So you're right, actually, as long as there's enough butter, you'll get your nutritional value.
Yes.
You mentioned the architectural aspects of a storage facility. And, my parents' house, when I was a kid, we had kind of a natural storage facility, old house. Part of the cellar, which is hardly more than a crawl space, with no natural light. 141 bulb inside the door into that area. So the kids always called it the dark hole. So mother would send you to the dark hole to forage in the wooden barrel for the sanded carrots or beets. But potatoes were kind of special. They were a bit of a problem in the springtime. We grew a lot of potatoes, and to get them to winter over, it was always you always in the springtime wanted to delay the sprouting as long as you could. So basically my question is, we kept them in a dark hole and it was, whatever the humidity content was, I don't know, it was pretty dry, I thought. Is there, or what is the most effective way if you were trying to get potatoes to overwinter and carry them as far into the spring season as you could without them sprouting profusely? Is there an optimal way to do it?
Certainly, come spring, they want to sprout. And they're going to be trying. I haven't done it, but I have heard one thing. I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but whether you can actually, if you can take them out of the dark to some extent. And I guess when you've got them in the dark, the sprouts will end up searching and growing and looking for light, and you have a potato with sprouts this long on it. I don't know if maybe you take it out of the dark, you'd have less growth. But I haven't experimented with that yet. We've wintered over and replanted before, but usually by springtime we're not keeping, or we haven't figured that out well enough yet. I don't think.
Yes.
For the roots that like more damp for storage, the material that you store them in, you don't put any moisture on that, right?
Some people would say you could, especially with sawdust. Even just using green sawdust, freshly sawn, would help. It depends on the humidity of your space. I guess if you've got a very dry space, you might want to have some moisture in that.
You were using straw.
I wouldn't want to do it in the straw. I think that's probably why the books all recommend sawdust and sand, because you could get some mold in the straw.
Chuck, did you have a question?
Just a couple comments. Yeah, one on the onions, usually if you see them, they're in a net bag. You don't want to put them in a closed bag. Again, it's to keep them dry. And so if they're in an open net bag, rather than don't put them in a plastic, and don't put them in a plastic bag, and a paper bag doesn't work real well. So they want to be really keep them dry. Those comments on commercially the potatoes, they have an inhibitor that will stop the sprouting in the potatoes. That's why they can carry them through later into the summer. But that you cannot plant those potatoes and have them grow because I'm not sure how the inhibitor actually works, but that's that. So there are commercially that's what's done for potatoes that you get, in April and May and June in the supermarket, unless they're bought from the southern hemisphere. Also mentioned potatoes as being white. That's not totally true. We grow yellow potatoes, blue potatoes, red potatoes. They're red in the flesh as well as the thing. So they can be quite colorful. I think for the chef, there's different flavors in that, and also for the presentation, different colors.
And the nutritional value, so the color matters.
What you said about the inhibitor reminds me that as we store the potatoes in the fall, after they've been fairly dry, and I struck all of the as we put them down, we had a brown powder that they called bar sprout. And as we put the potatoes down, we would sprinkle that over the potatoes, and then put in more potatoes into them, and then sprinkle it on top. And we weren't concerned with, we didn't plan on seed because we always bought it certified seed. So we were trying to prolong the overwinters stock as long as we could. So they did have an inhibitor in those days. Perhaps it did some good.
I guess on the onions and garlic, we talked about the netted bag or basket is also a good vessel with providing that airflow.
Yes.
Nobody mentioned dehydration as a means of storage. Have you tried that? And nutritionally, how would that affect with temperature being important?
Have you tried it?
Not particularly.
Yeah,
no.
We do.
yeah,
Temporary storage
yeah.
for a week.
Yeah, yeah, and from a nutrition perspective, the heat isn't that high that it's going to have much of a negative effect, and it's actually concentrating the nutrients by losing the water. So, and if it's maintaining the viability in the sense of edible quality, you know, you're better off if you're going to lose it. Then drying is always going to be your better option. So, yeah.
Can you do that at home?
Both, some at work. We do a lot of dehydrating at work and some at home. I mean, at home, more on the apples and tomatoes, or the little cherry tomatoes. You can dry those, and strawberries and raspberries, we dry those, and we can eat them in our breakfast or wherever later in the year. As far as these crops, I'm not sure about, but
I wouldn't do that.
beets do. You can put beets in there, kind of
You can do
interesting.
carrots too.
Yeah.
Do carrots, onions.
How do you store them after you dry them?
You can squeeze them in a plastic bag and try and squeeze all the air out, because moisture is what you don't want in this case. So it will absorb the moisture in the, it will absorb the moisture in the air. Ambient humidity will just make them go limp.
So just in the cabinet?
In a cabinet, yeah, room temperature.
And how best to dry them? Is there a...
Well, we mostly have a dehydrator. You know, it's pretty easy to use. Yeah, but I mean, garlic, you just hang that, it does it for you.
Yes.
I don't know, quite everything we talked about, the potatoes in that corner, but somebody told me that particularly towards the end of winter, when you're getting to the bottom of the potatoes that it's stored, sometimes there's that kind of greenish iridescent sheen on the potato. I don't know how I got that, and they said not to eat potatoes, and that's toxic. You know what I mean?
The green's not the toxic part. That if a potato is exposed to light and then it develops the chlorophyll, that it actually can produce a alkaloid that can, in high concentration, be toxic. But yeah.
How would you eat it?
Would I eat it, or could you eat it?
Would you?
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to get sick from a small amount of it, but it is in something that you'd want to avoid.
Okay, so when you see that green, that means it's been exposed to the light?
It's been exposed to light. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So oxalic acid is the kind of
Yeah.
oxalic acid.
Okay.
Can you just cut that off, or do you have to put it on the table?
Cut it deep.
Is it just indicated by the color? Because sometimes when you don't peel a potato, it tastes bitter, I feel like. Is that from the same cause, or is it totally different?
I'm not sure what that is. I know they turn color because they're exposed to light, to oxygen, so they can actually turn blue to green when they're exposed to oxygen. That's a different compound, but I don't know about I don't know what the flavor compound
that
is.
bitterness was an indicator of something unhealthy about
Well,
it.
the alkaloid is a bitter compound, so that could be it. Yeah.
But in general, we say the peels, the skins could be bitter. So you'll read that in general, and especially there's a red, one of the red potatoes. Every once in a while, you can take this one's really bitter, and I think it's a variety that's more bitter than other varieties with the skin on.
Yes.
On one of the beets that we don't have on the table, but one of the, if you don't have a root cellar, one really delicious way to store them for eating in the winter is to pickle them.
Yes.
I was wondering about these roots. Pull them out of the ground, they're pretty dirty. What sort of cleaning should you do, if anything, for these roots before you store them?
Typically, the least amount of cleaning you can do, the better before storage. Knock off excess dirt. Most things you want to trim the tops, but leave enough. Especially squash and pumpkins, you want to make sure you still have the stem. Without the stem, they'll spoil very quickly. Stuff like beets, if you trim the tops too short, they'll tend to bleed colors. If you wash them, you run the risk of just damaging them just slightly, and might be just enough to set them off in storage. So we just store them pretty dirty. Wipe off most of the dirt, but then save your scrubbing until you're ready to use them.
How big is it to store vegetables for several weeks in the refrigerator?
Depends on the vegetable and where in the refrigerator, I think.
If they like moisture, then it's okay, better.
Yeah, it's a very humid environment. Yeah.
How often do you need to check in under the layers to make sure you don't have one that's gone bad?
Well, the books will say once a week is good. We try to, we go to market once a week, so we're sort of sorting through stuff once a week. I think we could do a better job on that, but you should keep an eye on things, because if one starts going really bad, could go bad very quickly and then start spoiling those next to it and touching it.
Yes.
You ever have a problem with critters getting in to eat it?
Depend. Yeah, if you, it's good to be careful about that. You want to make sure your bins are up off the ground. You don't want to have anything to attract them in general, like loose grains or anything around. I guess we've seen more damage from stuff left in the field over winter, under the snow and under mulch than in the cellar. But if you had mice, you might want to. Something you'd want to keep an eye on and set traps if need be.
Someone else? Yes.
Do you recommend wooden boxes to put them in as opposed to like plastic, or it doesn't matter?
Well, this winter I did find in wooden bin, I have some wooden apple crates that are that big, and we've got some plastic bins that are about that big too. And some of the roots seem to store a little better in the plastic bins actually than the wooden bins, but I think in the center of the wooden bins things stayed really good, but the edges got a little softer. And I think maybe it just holds a little more moisture. But maybe if you just packed it better in a wooden bin, paid more attention to how close you are to the edge, it would probably work fine.
Chuck, did you have another?
Someone mentioned mice and problems with your storing. I've had some experience with parsnips particularly. We had this beautiful row of parsnips I left out, and I came out in the spring and going to dig them. I could see the little bit of green where they just started to grow there. I pull them out, and that was all I had was the green. It was a nice hole underneath. And I've got the gill-feather turnips that we've got outside now. I have seen some mouse damage, but I was careful not to put the hay on to insulate them until things were pretty well on in the winter, so that the mice would not build up a nice population early in the season under that mulch, because I knew I'd lose a lot. I've seen a little bit of damage, but not a great deal. And maybe another little bit of Yankee humor here. You talked about the dried apples. It was the old New Hampshire farmer. What he did, he ate dried apples for breakfast, drank water for lunch, and swelled up for supper.
Did I see another hand up? Yes.
I think negative things about what are called these kinds of root vegetables and nightshade vegetables. So what is that negative concern about?
I flipped through something and said the negative energy around the root vegetables was from World War I, and that it survived. It kept the soldiers alive on eating rutabagas and turnips only, and so afterwards, people turned their backs on something that they were tired from. And of course, there's a bit of a sulfuric smell to some of these crops.
Yes.
Some people with particular types of inflammatory arthritis have severe reactions to the deadly nightshade family, even including potatoes, I think. But it's a pretty big family.
Yeah, it's not just roots. I mean, there's eggplant and tomatoes all fit into the nightshade. So.
Okay. Yes.
For Farmer Joel, I have tried to grow carrots, and sometimes my carrots are really long, and I do the same way, and this year they're really stubby. And so is there a trick? Am I loosen the soil? Is there something that I'm missing in the nutrients or the tops?
Well, it's interesting. Is this in the same place, same bed?
It's a raised bed.
Mm-hmm. They say, certainly the looser the soil, the better. Kind of speaking to what Ted was talking about with variety specific too. In some cases, you match a variety to the soil you're growing in. If you've got a deep, loose soil, you can grow a longer, thinner carrot. If you've got a harder, rockier soil, you want to grow a shorter, stubbier carrot. But as far as nutrient values, most root crops don't want a lot of fertilizer, a lot of nitrogen. They prefer more phosphorus. You got your NPKs, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Root vegetables like phosphorus, and if you get too much nitrogen, you tend to get maybe branching on some of your carrots and stuff, and not quite as consistent a root. I think be watching what you're using for fertilizer make sure it's a high phosphorus, or using composted manure provides more phosphorus than composted green material.
Sometimes they come out and they're
Split.
Yeah.
Actually split themselves, and that can happen in other vegetables as well with getting too much water right before harvest. You see that in a lot of fruits. You see that in cabbages too. If you get you're going to be harvesting soon, you want to keep an eye on the weather for multiple reasons. You want to delay harvest as long as possible before hard freeze. You also want to keep an eye on not harvesting. If they're mature, you don't want to let them sit through a lot of rain if you can help it, because they may tend to split.
Okay, well, I think the time is moving on. I don't know if anyone else on the panel has any closing remarks. Is there anything else any of you wish to say?
Great questions, and enjoy the vegetables.
Good.
Right.
Good. Okay.
Roots are really fun to grow. They're kind of one of the easier of the vegetables.
Mhm.
They're very forgiving, and
Get you through the winter.
then they get you through the winter. Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of fresh stuff available in the summer nearby that you can get whether you're growing it or not. And I think one of the best things about roots is it allows us to rely on our own gardens and our neighbors' gardens through the winter, which is, I think, something that's important. It's that we're not relying entirely on foods that are shipped in or trucked long distances. We can, with a little forethought and planning, grow and work with our neighbors to grow enough really good food to get us through the winters and to store them. And it can be really fun too.
Well, thank you very much, Joel, Joanne, and Ted. The next program, February 25th, has a large group up here, 6 of us. Joel will return to speak on vegetables and fruits, and we'll have Tina Sawtell from Pinewoods Yankee Farm on edible flowers, and Melissa Hollister on raising bees and honey. And of course, Joanne and Ted and I will be back at that time as well. Thank you very much for coming out on this snowy evening. I hope we got to the root of the matter.